I thought I could handle sharing my husband until the moment his eyes lit up when she walked in, and I felt like my marriage had been stolen. My heart raced as Daniel said, "You'll love this, Emily. Trust me." His voice shook with excitement I hadn't heard in years. My stomach twisted while I whispered, "I'm trying." The walls of our living room seemed to close in as I watched his every gesture betray me. The clock ticked too loud, mocking me with each passing second. I wondered why I ever agreed to this arrangement, convincing myself it was strength. Daniel poured wine, his hands trembling slightly, and I thought, was it nerves or desire? The sound of heels on hardwood echoed like a gunshot, and my chest clenched. The door opened, and Lily stepped inside, her smile glowing like a flare in the dark. Daniel's eyes flickered with awe, and my soul shattered. I wanted to scream but only breathed, "I'm still here." In that moment I realized love can burn you alive while you're still standing in its ashes. My name is Emily, and I wanted to believe love could stretch without breaking. Daniel said, "It's just an adventure, nothing more." His words felt light, but my chest ached under their weight. I told him, "If it keeps you here, I'll try." I wanted security so badly that I sold my comfort for a promise. The truth is, I thought polyamory would be proof of strength. But every night I stared at the ceiling, wondering who I was trying to convince. When Lily entered our lives, she was supposed to be a guest, a momentary thrill, not the fire that consumed us. I told myself rules would keep me safe, that boundaries were shields, but I felt cracks spreading even before she smiled at him. And still, I held on because letting go felt like death. Daniel always had that voice, smooth like velvet but heavy with persuasion. He held my hands and said, "We'll be stronger because of this." I wanted to believe him, and for a moment, I did. His smile promised devotion, his touch whispered safety, but his eyes carried hunger I didn't want to name. I nodded, whispering, "Okay for us." But inside I begged the universe not to punish me for my surrender. Lily's name hadn't even been spoken yet, and already I felt her shadow. I wanted to scream, but silence kept me soft, agreeable, the perfect partner who could bend without breaking. We built our safety on rules, fragile lines drawn in sand. I said, "No secrets, no favorites." Daniel kissed my forehead and answered, "Always equal." It sounded strong, but the words felt hollow even as I nodded. We laughed nervously while writing conditions like a contract for our hearts. Boundaries became chains I clung to for sanity. At night I repeated them like prayers, but even prayers can't stop desire from slipping through. Every word I wrote was a reminder of what I was most afraid to lose. The first night Lily came over, my smile cracked though I forced it to hold. She was radiant, and Daniel looked alive in a way that stung me. He whispered, "Relax, Em, it's fine." But every fiber in me screamed. I laughed too loud, poured more wine than I could drink, and nodded at words I barely heard. I wanted to be gracious, open, evolved, but inside, I was breaking piece by piece. That night, when I lay in bed, I whispered to myself, "You are still his wife." But the silence that followed felt like a lie. The first time we met Lily outside our home, Daniel's hand brushed hers too long, and I felt the air tighten. He said, "This is just dinner, Emily, nothing heavy." I forced a smile, answering, "Of course," while my chest ached with dread. Lily laughed at his jokes, her voice like music, and I stared at my glass to keep from staring at them. I wanted to be the woman who radiated calm, who seemed unshaken, but my pulse betrayed me. Every glance between them cut sharper than words. When the waiter poured wine, I felt like an outsider at my own table. Daniel leaned closer to Lily when she spoke, and though he never touched her again, the space between us grew colder. I whispered to myself, "He is still yours," but the lie was already slipping through my fingers. It started small, subtle shifts in his gaze, little sparks he thought I wouldn't notice. Daniel said, "You're quiet tonight, Em." His tone was casual, but his eyes had already wandered to Lily. I answered, I'm fine, though I was crumbling. The truth pressed against my ribs like a secret trying to claw its way out. I caught him studying her hands as she gestured, his lips curling into a smile that used to be mine. My wine tasted bitter, each sip heavy with jealousy I tried to swallow. The sound of Lily's laughter lingered in my ears longer than it should have. My stomach turned as Daniel brushed crumbs from her plate, an intimacy disguised as kindness. I wanted to scream, "Stop looking at her like that," but I stayed silent, drowning in my own restraint. At home later, I told Daniel, "You don't have to hide your feelings." He frowned, answering, "What are you talking about? You're imagining things." His denial cut deeper than confession would have. I stared at him, searching for the man who promised honesty, but shadows danced across his face. I whispered, "Just don't lie to me," and he reached for my hand, warm but empty. His touch was supposed to soothe, but it only reminded me of how far he had drifted. My voice broke when I added, "I can feel it, Daniel." He kissed my forehead, murmuring, "You're all I need," but the words were hollow. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating, and I realized I was clinging to a ghost of the love we once had. The rules we wrote together began to bend like fragile glass. I caught Daniel whispering with Lily outside the bar, their voices soft and secretive. My chest burned as I told myself, they promised no secrets. When I asked him later, Daniel laughed lightly, saying, "She was only telling me a story." I wanted to believe, but his eyes darted away too quickly. The rules had been my shield, but each broken one sliced me instead. I clung to them desperately, repeating no favorites, no lies like a prayer, but prayers don't stop betrayal. Even Lily looked at me differently now, her smile holding something sharp. I knew then that boundaries were never protection, only illusions that crumble when desire demands more. That night, I sat across from them in our living room, and I felt invisible. Daniel laughed at Lily's story, eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen in years. I forced a laugh, whispering to myself, "This is what you wanted." My chest tightened as his hand brushed hers again, subtle but electric. I stared at the wine in my glass, red like a wound I couldn't close. Lily looked at me with a smile too sweet, almost pitying, and I hated how small I felt under her gaze. Daniel leaned toward her, as though gravity itself had shifted. In that moment, I realized I wasn't sharing my husband, I was visiting his new world, a guest in my own marriage. The nights became longer, filled with the glow of Daniel's phone, lighting up our bedroom. I would lie awake, listening to the faint buzz, pretending to sleep as he whispered replies. Daniel said, "Just work messages," but the softness in his tone betrayed him. I whispered into the pillow, "At midnight?" My chest felt heavy with the silence that followed. Lily's name never appeared on the screen in front of me, but I felt her presence in every vibration. My heart beat in time with those pings, each one sharper than the last. I told myself, it's nothing, but even lies lose power after being repeated too many times. The distance between us grew wider than the space of the bed, and I wondered if I was already gone in his world. One evening, I caught Daniel leaning close to Lily in a corner of the bar, his lips barely moving as he whispered. The noise around us vanished. All I saw was the curve of her smile. I asked, "What are you two talking about?" Daniel straightened instantly, replying too quickly, "Just something funny she said earlier." His laugh was thin, stretched, and brittle. Lily looked at me with innocent eyes, but her smirk betrayed her. I smiled back, brittle as glass, saying, "I see." In that moment I knew secrets had crept into the cracks, spilling over boundaries like water finding every gap. My heart twisted, screaming that I had lost control of what I thought I could handle. Later that night, I asked Daniel, "Are you hiding something?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead, and said, "Emily, you were imagining things." His words were firm, but his eyes refused to meet mine. I felt the truth press against us like a storm waiting to break. I said softly, "Please, don't make me beg for honesty." He took my hand and kissed it, murmuring, "You're everything to me, but his touch was cold. I sat there trembling, whispering to myself, "Then why do I feel so alone?" Silence stretched until it became unbearable, and I knew I was living inside a script written for someone else's love story. Intimacy became scarce, stolen moments replaced by avoidance. When Daniel touched me, it felt mechanical, a duty instead of desire. I whispered, "Do you still want me?" His silence was louder than any answer. He rolled over in bed, facing away, and I stared at the ceiling, wondering when love turned into performance. The rules we wrote no longer mattered because the energy between us had already shifted. My skin ached for warmth, but I lay cold beside him, my body craving the man who was already elsewhere. Tears slid quietly, unseen, but they burned as if they were proof of every lie I tried to accept. I could sense the shift in the air even without proof. Lily's name echoed in my mind every time Daniel left the room. I watched him unlock his phone with urgency he never showed me. I told myself it's nothing, but the way his lips curved while reading said otherwise. He said, "You're imagining things," but the way he avoided my eyes screamed guilt. Each word between us felt like a thread snapping. I wanted to scream, "Don't you see me breaking?" But instead I stayed silent, swallowing my pain like poison. By then, suspicion was no longer suspicion, it was certainty disguised as hope. The moment shattered me came in silence, not words. Lily walked into the living room, and Daniel's eyes lit up brighter than they had for me in years. His face softened, his body leaned forward, and I knew then that I was no longer his center. He said, "You made it," voice trembling with joy I hadn't heard in months. My chest caved as Lily smiled and replied, "I wouldn't miss it." I stood frozen, clutching my glass, whispering inside, "What about me?" The world around me blurred, their glow burning me in shadows. In that flicker of his gaze, my marriage ended, though the walls still stood. Daniel once told me, "No one will replace you." But in that moment, I saw how false that vow had become. He couldn't hide the awe in his expression, the hunger in his eyes. Lily laughed, and the sound became the knife that cut me open. I said quietly, "I'm right here," but no one heard me. My presence had shrunk, my body a shadow in a home that was once mine. The way he looked at her was not casual, it was devotion, reckless and raw. The realization struck with cruel force. I was just a guest in my own marriage, and I didn't even know when I'd been evicted. The rules we wrote together collapsed that night. I saw Daniel's hand brush against Lily's knee under the table, casual enough to hide, deliberate enough to betray. My throat tightened and I whispered, "We said no favorites." Daniel froze for a second, then smiled nervously, replying, "It's nothing." Lily looked between us, her smirk small but sharp, as if daring me to react. My blood roared in my ears and I wanted to scream, but my voice broke into silence. The rules had been nothing but walls built on sand, and I felt them crumble as his touch lingered too long. I found his phone left carelessly on the counter, screen still lit with messages. My breath caught as Lily's name glowed bright, her words more tender than any he had given me lately. I whispered, "He lied," as tears blurred the screen. Daniel entered the room, and his face drained of color when he saw me holding it. "Emily, it's not what you think," he said, voice cracking. My chest heaved, and I answered, "It's exactly what I think." The truth wasn't hidden. It was carved into every unread message, every late-night smile. I realized I had been competing in a race I never agreed to run. The secret that broke me was not just his words. It was hers. Among the messages I saw Lily write, "I wish she wasn't in the way." Daniel had replied, "She'll understand eventually." My hands shook as I dropped the phone, whispering, "Understand what?" My world tilted, everything I thought secure shattering into pieces. He reached for me, saying, "Emily, please." But his plea was too late. That was the moment I knew betrayal wasn't accidental. It was chosen. Every smile, every lie, every touch had been a rehearsal for the truth he never admitted aloud. I was no longer his choice. The silence after the messages was unbearable, so I finally broke. I screamed. How long have you been lying to me? My voice cracked, echoing against the walls that once held our laughter. Daniel raised his hands, stammering, Emily, it's not what you think. My blood boiled as I spat back. Don't you dare insult me with that. Lily stood behind him, frozen, eyes wide yet unflinching. I turned toward her, whispering, was I ever part of this, or was I just in the way? My chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, my body trembling as though I was holding back fire. For the first time, Daniel had no words, only guilt burning in his silence. Daniel tried to hold my gaze, his voice cracking as he said, I never meant for this to happen. I laughed bitterly, replying, lies don't just happen, Daniel, choices do. Lily shifted uncomfortably, her hand brushing his arm as if to claim him. My eyes narrowed and I whispered, don't touch him in front of me. The air felt thick, every breath cutting like glass. Daniel said, please, Em, you're still the one I love, but his words tasted like ash. My body shook as I shouted, then why do your eyes tell me otherwise? The walls shook with the weight of my rage, and I felt my heart splinter under the truth that couldn't be unsaid. Lily finally spoke, her voice steady and sharp. I'm tired of being treated like a secret. Her words stabbed the air, and Daniel flinched. I stared at her, fury coursing through me, and hissed, you were supposed to be casual, temporary. She lifted her chin, replying, I deserve more than being hidden. Daniel buried his face in his hands, whispering, stop, both of you. My heart raced as I shouted, you gave her pieces of me that you promised were mine. The truth spilled like blood, staining everything in its path. Lily's glare burned into me, and I knew in that instant she wanted to take more than my husband. She wanted my place. The argument exploded, voices clashing until I could barely breathe. Daniel shouted, I love you both, why can't you understand? His confession pierced me like a blade. I screamed back, because love doesn't divide, it destroys. Lily's voice rose above mine, I won't be your half anymore. Daniel slammed his fist against the table, glass shattering, red wine spilling like blood across the wood. The sound silenced us for a moment, but the damage was already done. My throat ached from screaming, my chest from breaking. In that chaos I saw it clearly. There was no balance, no equality. Someone always loses. And I knew it was me. Tears streamed as I choked out the words I had feared all along. I was never enough, was I? Daniel's face crumbled, his silence louder than any confession. Lily stared, lips pressed tight, victorious yet wounded. My body shook as I sank into the chair, whispering, you both broke me. Daniel stepped forward, voice breaking, Emily, I can't lose you. I laughed bitterly, tears falling faster, answering, you already did. The room felt colder, the air heavier, as if love itself had left. In that final moment, I admitted aloud what I had been hiding since the beginning. I was the outsider in my own marriage, and no amount of sacrifice could change that truth. The storm ended not with shouting, but with silence so heavy it felt alive. Daniel sat on the couch, his head buried in his hands. Lily stood near the door, her eyes distant, lips pressed tight. I sat on the floor, arms wrapped around myself, whispering, it's over, isn't it? Daniel looked at me, his voice barely audible. I didn't mean to lose us. His words floated like ashes, meaningless against the weight of betrayal. Lily finally whispered, I should go, her voice flat, almost guilty. No one stopped her. The room was soaked in quiet, only the sound of her heels fading away remained. And in that silence I realized what was left of us was nothing but wreckage. The next morning, the house felt colder, emptier than ever. I moved through the kitchen, every step heavy, as if walking through fog. Daniel sat at the table, staring at his untouched coffee. I whispered, we can't go back, my voice shaking. He finally looked at me, eyes red, and said, I don't know who I am without you. His confession ached, but it felt like it belonged to someone I no longer recognized. The walls still held our photos, smiling faces framed in happier lies, but they looked like strangers. I touched the picture of us on the fridge and whispered, "That's not us anymore." The silence between us was no longer tension. It was emptiness. Lily left, but the damage stayed behind. The echo of her laughter haunted the walls. At night, I walked past the empty guest room and shivered, imagining the ghost of her presence. Daniel avoided that room too, his footsteps halting before the door like it was cursed. I whispered one night, "You invited her in, and she never really left." He didn't answer, only turned away, ashamed. The silence had become our language, every unsaid word carving deeper distance between us. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing I wasn't afraid of losing him anymore. I was afraid of losing myself completely if I stayed. One evening I sat at the table with Daniel, our notebooks of rules still there like relics of a broken faith. I flipped through the pages, every line a reminder of my desperation to control what was uncontrollable. Daniel reached out, whispering, "I thought this would save us." I closed the book and said, "It only destroyed us faster." He bowed his head, tears wetting the pages as his voice cracked. "I don't know how to fix this." I stared at him, hollow, and whispered, "Maybe it can't be fixed." The air between us was heavy with acceptance. The rules had failed, and so had we. In the quiet that followed, I sat alone on the porch, staring into the night sky. The air was cool, stars sharp above me, but I felt no peace. My hands trembled as I whispered, "I gave everything, and it still wasn't enough." Daniel stepped into the doorway, his silhouette shadowed, and asked, "Will you leave me?" My chest tightened as I turned slowly, replying, "You already left me, Daniel. You just didn't walk out the door." His face fell, and he turned away without another word. The night swallowed me whole, and I finally accepted that survival would mean walking alone through the ashes of what love used to be. I sat in the quiet of the empty living room, my body trembling from exhaustion. Daniel whispered, "We can fix this," his voice raw, but his eyes hollow. I looked at him and asked, "Fix what? The ashes?" My chest heaved as I realized I was no longer speaking to my husband, but to a stranger wearing his face. The silence after my words was thicker than smoke, pressing against us. Daniel reached for my hand, but I pulled away, whispering, "I can't carry this anymore." My voice broke like glass shattering. That night I understood. Our love had already died, and we were just living in its ghost. I remembered the first night Daniel suggested polyamory, the way his voice promised adventure. He said, "We'll be stronger for it," and I wanted to believe him. Now those words replayed in my mind like a cruel echo. I whispered, "That was the moment I lost us." I had agreed because I thought love could stretch without breaking, but I was wrong. I traced the memory like a scar, realizing my downfall had been dressed up as compromise. Daniel's face twisted as if he heard the truth I never spoke before. I finally admitted it, whispering to myself. I said yes because I was afraid of losing him, and in the end, I lost myself. The rules had been my armor, and now they lay scattered like broken glass. I picked up the notebook from the table, the ink smudged with tears from nights of begging for order. Daniel whispered, "We tried, but the words sounded empty." I shook my head, replying, "No, we failed." The weight of those pages crushed me, each line proof of how desperately I had tried to hold something already slipping away. I whispered again, "We made rules to protect us, but all they did was reveal how fragile we were." Daniel lowered his head, silent, and for the first time I felt stronger in admitting the truth than in clinging to lies. I carried the silence for so long that when it finally cracked, it devoured me. One night I told Daniel, I stayed quiet because I thought I could endure it. My voice shook as I added, "But silence doesn't save love. It kills it." His face crumpled, tears spilling down, but no words came. I pressed my palms against the table to keep from collapsing. For years I had been the silent sufferer, hoping patience would protect me, but it only turned me into a ghost in my own life. That night I finally confessed aloud what my silence had hidden. I was dying long before she walked in. The last words I ever said to him were sharp enough to cut air. Daniel whispered, "We can start over." But I looked into his eyes and replied, "You already replaced me." My voice was calm, haunting, final. He froze, mouth open, but no words came. I stood, walking past him, my body hollow but my spirit lighter. As I opened the door, I whispered one final truth: I was only ever a guest in my own marriage. The silence that followed felt eternal, an echo I knew would haunt him as much as it haunted me. And in that final moment, the story ended, not with closure, but with an emptiness that will never leave.